The clock is ticking.
The final votes are being cast.
And after all the speeches, all the promises, all the arguing,
it's time to see what Britain decides. Good evening and welcome to what is certain to be a dramatic and indeed historic night. I'm Krishnan Guru-Murthy.
And I'm Emily Maitlis. We've come together for this election night. Thank you so much for joining us too. Well, as you can see, we're just a few minutes away from the polls closing at 10 o'clock. That's when we'll get a major indication of how tonight is going to pan out with our exit poll. Basically, a huge survey of how people voted today, and it should give us a good idea of what the actual results will be.
A lot of pledges from the politicians over the last 6 weeks. Tonight, our manifesto is one you can absolutely rely on. We promise you drama. We promise you all the results that matter. And we promise you the best analysis around.
That's why we've also teamed up with Rory, Stewart and Alastair Campbell from The Rest is Politics podcast. We're delighted to say they're with us all night to share their insight and opinions.
Now, over the next 11 hours, and with no commercial breaks, our aim is to help make sense of what tonight means for Britain and for all of us. Having said that, the one thing we're absolutely not allowed to talk about before voting ends is what might actually happen tonight.
If this was the Euros, kickoff is nearly here. This is the pre-match build-up. But the rules say we can't talk about the game. So right now, our team needs to show unparalleled levels of restraint.
Alongside us, Channel 4 News political editor Gary Gibbon, and we're joined exclusively by an unprecedented lineup of politicians, starting off with Harriet Harman, former deputy leader of the Labour Party, who held almost every post as an MP for more than 40 years. Kwasi Kwarteng, who was Liz Truss's Chancellor for fewer than 40 days. And Nadine Dorries, the former Conservative Culture Secretary and a close ally of Boris Johnson. All three have stood down as MPs, but they're stepping up for us tonight.
And for reaction to that exit poll, we also have Sir Vince Cable, the former Liberal Democrat leader, and Widdicombe, who's backing reform, Murray Black, the former deputy leader of the SNP in Westminster, and Azim Zahawi, who's held senior posts under 4 Conservative Prime Ministers.
So I count 8 former MPs and 3 former Strictly contestants here tonight. Will Anne and Vince be dancing with delight? Worth staying up all night just in case. And who better to help us make sense of all the numbers we're going to be bombarded with later than a genuine professor of maths? Hannah Fry is with us.
I certainly am. Thank you. Yes, I am your numbers nerd tonight. And from this corner, we're going to be crunching all of that data from 650 constituencies to give you the swings, the majorities, the best stories from the stats. But of course, there is only one number that really counts in the end, and that is number 10.
We can reveal it is a Labour landslide being predicted by the exit poll. The catastrophe for the Conservatives. Keir Starmer becomes the 7th Labour Prime Minister in history.
So, a Labour landslide. This is your voice. This is our country deciding we've had enough. If the exit polls are right, this is a moment of radical, generational change. Keir Starmer will become the first person to lead Labour from opposition to government in 27 years. And that, for many of our viewers tonight, will be a virtual, maybe an actual lifetime.
So we're trying to
bring you those numbers and the breakdown as we just digest that and look at the faces of some of our guests around the table and indeed in the audience now, and we will tell you exactly what the party has. We are hearing that Labour has got 410 seats. Conservatives are on 131.
Oh, wow.
The Lib Dems are on 61 seats. The Reform Party are on 13.
That's extraordinary.
An extraordinary number for a new party. The SNP is on
SNP
10
disaster
seats. So we will remind you of those numbers now as we're getting them up on the screen for you. Labour on 410, Conservatives on 131. The Lib Dems have beaten their best record, 61. Reform, an outstanding result for a brand new party, 13 seats tonight. And the SNP has been absolutely devastated with a result that leaves them with just 10 seats.
So correct me if my maths is wrong, but I think that's a Labour majority of 170. And that is very comparable to 1997.
It's a bit less.
Yeah, a bit less than 97. It's not as good as 97.
It's just a little bit under where 1997 was.
Well, this is obviously a devastating judgment on the government and their failure and their unfitness to govern the country. But it is an absolute triumph for Keir Starmer. When you think about it, 5 years ago, when people had the chance to vote, they elected 162 more Conservative MPs than Labour. And now we have a majority. It's an absolute triumph for him and a real, I think, moment for hope and change.
And now, obviously, we have to say, you know, those exit poll numbers could shift. They shift around by a few seats during the course of the night. But that's what we're looking at. We're looking at a very similar Labour total and a Labour majority. But actually, what's really interesting is that the Conservative seats at 131 is devastatingly bad, isn't it, Harriet Harman?
It is devastatingly bad and richly deserved, I would say. I mean, people have really been put through it and people have made their judgment. But I think, had it not been for the fact that Keir Starmer had shown that we were a proper, possible, potential government, we wouldn't have had that result. So once they had the chance to vote for an opposition to come into government that they could actually trust, that the dam broke.
Kwasi Kwarteng, former Chancellor, this is on you.
It's a bad. Well, it's on the whole party, and it's on 14 years. But it's a bad result. But I have to say the MRP polls earlier this week were suggesting some of them double digits. So even though it's a very poor result.
So wait, you're looking at 131 and saying.
I think 131 is the basis of an opposition, whereas a lot of the earlier polls we were seeing were on seats. We were on 55, 64, which would have been an extinction level event. I think the big number that's very surprising is the Reform on 13 seats, and none of us really have an idea where all those seats might be. 2 or 3 of them we know, but it'll be interesting to see what the other seats are.
It's the Conservatives' worst ever result, and yet they'll be sighing with relief.
It's true.
It's an extraordinary situation, and it is an extraordinary achievement for Labour. But a few people in the Labour Party, having had all these rather tempting polls out there, might be thinking, thought we might do a bit better than that. You were raising the very important point about what those could translate to in percentages. And as Krishnan said, we're not going to find out that number until later, and we're going to be taking a stab at it for quite a long time. But those numbers are compatible with Labour getting at or maybe just slightly below 40% of the poll, and the Tories having picked up to maybe something around 22. I mean, we just can't know at the moment, but it plays to your point that that massive figure has been delivered with a relatively small percentage of the people. It might even be a percentage that starts with 3.
It could also be the first ever election where you have 4 parties over 10%.
Yeah. And we do have that complication as well. But what I'm saying is that looks like love, but that is a loveless landslide. But there has not been the sort of enthusiasm that you might expect out there. People are shifting because they're trying to punish that blue line, and it's going to be fascinating to see how Keir Starmer tries to hold on to it.
10 seats is what the SNP are on tonight. That's an absolute disastrous defeat.
Yes, I think the question was always how rough a night the SNP would have, and if that exit poll's correct, then the answer's a pretty rough night, definitely.
And that's way in excess of what anyone was predicting, isn't it?
Well,
the party was not prepared for 10 seats.
Internally, I think we were on a bad night, yes, because I think there's 3 things at play to end up with that result. And I think the first one would be the overwhelming desire to get rid of the Tories. I think that definitely went against the SNP's campaign. Second of all, I think the SNP in itself has clearly been riddled with scandals and infighting over the last few while, which has undoubtedly damaged the party. But the third factor is definitely going to be turnout. I'll be interested to hear what the turnout was, not just because we now have more barriers in this election with having to have ID, the fact that everyone's uninspired, the postal votes fiasco, but also today I've learned it was raining up in Scotland, which also always has a negative impact on the SNP.
Is this existential at this level for the SNP, or do you think, well, actually, we've got 2 years before the next Scottish election?
Well, I think that's going to be a question that the SNP is going to have to wrestle with, because undoubtedly the party has to go away and have a reflection on what's gone wrong and try and rebuild and reconnect with people. The question will be, is it sensible to drag on for another 2 years until the Scottish election, or is it the kind of result where we just want to rip the Band-Aid off? So I think time will tell once we see what the end result is.
Honestly, Nadine, you've got to get over Boris Johnson. The fact that Rishi Sunak wheeled him out...
Actually, I find that quite a sexist comment.
No, it's not.
Alastair,
it's not.
thank you.
No, it's not.
No, I think it is, Alastair.
It really isn't. You still seem to think that Boris Johnson is an electoral asset. Rishi Sunak wheeling him out the eve of the election was one of many mistakes he's made. Liz Truss and Boris Johnson...
I think that's the reason why we've got 131 and not 50.
There's something I think about the Lords, and look, the Lords is an abomination as far as I'm concerned. I really would love to have a complete reform of the place with something to replace it. But to get anything done, not least because of the obscene packing of it in recent years, the ludicrous situation of Liz Truss putting in about for every day she served, she gets a resignation.
That's not true. She had about 5. That's not true.
She had
less than a handful.
Fewer. She may have had.
And there was it 4? I think she had 4.
OK.
Tell the truth, Alastair.
She packed she's had a resignation honours list. Rishi Sunak's going to get one. Boris Johnson had one. And they've
and
packed
Tony
it.
Blair
They've
had a
packed
massive one.
Tony Blair didn't.
You went on it, but he had a massive one.
Tony Blair didn't do a resignation honours list. So don't talk about facts, Nadine. Nadine, if you want to sit there all night and talk rubbish and parrot away, it's probably a last show on television.
I'll hold my hands up.
Can I finish the point about the Lords?
The Lords with Labour peers.
So Labour, to get anything done, are going to have to get stuff through the Lords. That's our system. What I hope is that people do as Harriet says she's going to do, to get in there, and Lords reform is part of what a Labour government does.
So watch out tonight for Grant Shapps in Welwyn Hatfield and Penny Mordaunt in Portsmouth North. Both of those results we're expecting around 3:30am. You'll also want to watch out for the Deputy PM Oliver Dowden over in Hertsmere at 4am. You've got Home Secretary James Cleverly in Braintree about the same time, and former leader Ian Duncan-Smith in Chingford. There's Jacob Rees-Mogg also in Somerset. That'll be about 4:30am. Ex-PM Liz Truss in South West Norfolk at 5:30. And even Rishi Sunak himself in Richmond and Northallerton. A lot more on all of them later. But for the Tories, the target, it's always been holding on to what they already have. Like in Swindon South, this is where Sir Robert Buckland, the former Lord Chancellor, is defending a 5,500 majority. If they manage to keep that place, they'll actually be doing OK. But they're also going to want to win places like Basildon and Billericay. That's a very early declarer, that place. That is party chair Richard Holden's constituency. They need to hold on to Monmouthshire. This is Welsh Secretary David T.C. Davies' seat. And Tatton, that's where Minister for Common Sense Esther McVeigh is stationed. Over in Newark, meanwhile, that is leadership hopeful Robert Jenrick's seat. And a loss there, that could mean that the Tories have fewer than 100 seats. And it is not just Labour that the Tories could lose out to tonight. You need to watch out for some of the Liberal Democrat targets. Places like Godalming and Ash, where Jeremy Hunt is stationed. If they succeed, he would then be the first serving Chancellor to lose his seat. They're also after Education Secretary Gillian Keegan in Chichester. Actually, Ed Davey, he's got targets all over the place, especially in Wimbledon, in Guildford, in Lewis and in Cheltenham. They have targeted dozens of seats in home counties and the South West. And they could also benefit quite a lot from tactical voting elsewhere. For Nigel Farage, meanwhile, the main aim is for him to win his seat in Clacton for reform. This will be his 8th attempt at getting into Parliament. Remember, UKIP did once win in Clapton. And of course, they're also going to be hoping that the party's chair, Richard Tice, manages to take Boston and that Lee Anderson can win over in Ashfield. But could they win even more? Scotland is also going to be very interesting tonight because the SNP has dominated in Scotland for nearly 10 years. Some things to keep an eye out for. Aberdeenshire North and Moray East, that's where Douglas Ross is standing here despite announcing that he's quitting as the Scottish Tory leader after this evening. And Secretary of State for Scotland, Alastair Jack, he's also standing down in Dumfries and Galloway, which might mean an SNP gain tonight. Another key seat for John Swinney and the SNP is going to be Paisley and Renfrewshire South, Murray Black's old seat, don't forget. Labour, they're also hoping that they can take a few seats from the SNP, like in Glasgow, but also places like Lothian East and Airdrie and Shotts. But the SNP, they're also going to be under attack tonight from the Lib Dems in Dunbartonshire Mid and Fife North East because of the boundary changes. In Wales, we have got 32 seats that are up for grabs. You can watch out here for Wrexham. That was a bit of a surprise Tory win in 2019. And if Chief Whip Simon Hart loses in Carmarthen, then, well, Wales could see a Conservative wipeout, with Plaid Cymru likely to hold on to a couple of seats there. And finally, some other interesting stories. The Greens, Bristol Central. This could be a seat that Labour loses to the Greens, who are hoping to unseat Shadow Culture Secretary Thangam Debonair. And can George Galloway take Rochdale, which he, of course, won in a by-election in February? And finally, in Islington North, Labour's former leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is now standing as an independent after being suspended from the party in 2020. My goodness me, it's going to be a busy night.
Well, the exit poll is incredibly encouraging, and I think it shows that Keir's done a tremendous job of transforming the Labour Party and putting forward a programme for government that people can get behind after the 14 years of the chaos and decline under the Tories. They're getting their, the jury's out on them, and I think they're going to, have a very difficult night because they've took the voters for granted. They've, cost of living has gone up, people feel worse off, and they see that Labour is a changed Labour Party that can deliver a programme for government that will make the change that people desperately want to see.
The next election won't be like this at all. The likelihood is that the next election will be much more radical, much more punchy. That what Labour's done here is very unusual in the modern world. If you look at elections in Europe, elections in the United States, we're entering a world of much more aggressive, radical politics. And this is a real anomaly. They've come in probably with quite a small percentage of the vote. They've got this huge majority. I don't think they're going to be able to run a campaign in 5 years' time on fiscally conservative, social liberal, austerity light. I mean, it feels
I'm trying to get my head around the fact that we're talking about the next election.
No,
we haven't had a single...
got some government.
Let's stop.
The question I've been asked time and time again in the run-up to tonight is, will Rishi Sunak lose his seat? In all honesty, just the fact that that question is being asked is astonishing, because this constituency, well, it was frankly not even a question in previous elections. It was about as safe a Tory seat as it gets. Also, there's the fact that never before has a sitting Prime Minister lost their seat in a general election. The exit polls say that a Conservative win, a Rishi Sunak win here is likely. But I'd say there's just enough doubt there that this is going to be gripping here.
I'm joined here by the Hillman family, who have all voted in different ways, as I understand. How did you vote?
Conservative. Reform. Labour.
This must lead to some interesting conversations around the dinner table. OK, so do you always vote Conservative?
No. I have switched over the years. The reason I voted Conservative this year was I just wasn't that impressed with any of the main leaders. So I just looked locally at who was representing us, and we had a really proactive, good local constituency MP or candidate, Lucy Demery, so I voted for her.
Fantastic. And for reform, were you dead set on reform from the beginning, or were you wavering?
Oh, not at all. I actually wanted a Labour majority, and I'm glad to see it come through. But from looking at the polling, I felt like that was almost a foregone conclusion, and that my vote would be better used choosing who I wanted to be in opposition. And I feel like Nigel Farage's direct, no-nonsense attitude makes him quite good in that role, if not government.
Well, I think that they have fomented discontent on things like housing and the health service, and what they do is they they foment discontent and they offer no solutions. And I think one of the things that was particularly awful was them talking about they were going to have net zero immigration, when in fact that's not what they're actually promising, because they're leaving out of that students and essential workers. So what Keir's got to do is to deal with those basic concerns that people have got, you know, on housing, on the health service, on jobs and the cost of living, but also rebuild people's trust and confidence in government.
You and I talked on the day that you decided you'd had enough of Westminster. Yeah. You came in and you said, it's toxic, I don't want to have any further part in it. I'm wondering if, you know, you were just seeing this coming, this sort of tidal wave coming at you and thinking, I'm going to get out.
Genuinely, if that was the case, if I was sure that I would lose my seat, I would have stood again, because, frankly, financially is a better packet you get. So I don't think it was a foregone conclusion at all. But just as well, I made the decision I did, I think.
So basically, you lost Nicola Sturgeon and you lost Humza Yousaf. Yep. And now, under John Swinney, you've got an absolutely disastrous result for the party. I mean, are you starting to think that you should never have changed leader last time round? Are you starting to think... I mean, what does it tell you about leadership at the top of the SNP that this is where you are tonight?
I think it reflects the fact that the SNP have had an incredibly rocky couple of years. You know, and anyone who denies that fact is kidding themselves on. But I do think, to be fair to John Swinney, he did get the job 2 weeks, I think, before the election was called. So I wouldn't rush to put the blame on.
But on these results, the SNP is to Scotland what the Conservative Party is to England, well, to Westminster. I mean, they have been voted out of office for having spent too much time in office without providing results to the people of Scotland.
Well, I would argue with that slightly, because with the Westminster election, of course, the SNP have been in opposition. But I do think it ultimately plays into what's happened to the SNP, that there has been this uncomfortable balance of being opposition in Westminster whilst also having the responsibility of being the government in the Scottish Parliament.
And that Bridget May Phillipson has been duly elected to serve as member for the said constituency.
OK.
So there we are, Bridget Phillipson, the Shadow Education Secretary, probably the Education Secretary tomorrow, becomes the first Labour Minister to win her seat, the first result, and she will now make her acceptance speech.
Tonight, the British people have spoken, and if the exit poll this evening is again a guide to results across our country, as it so often is, then after 14 years, the British people have chosen change. They have chosen Labour, and they have chosen the leadership of Keir Starmer. Today, our country, with its proud history, has chosen a brighter future. The British people have decided that they believe, as Labour believes, that our best days lie ahead of us. Hope and unity, not decline and division. Stability over chaos. A government powered by hope, by the belief that tomorrow can not just be different from today, but better. A government of service, a government with purpose, above all to change our society for good. A government determined to build a Britain where background is no barrier, no matter who your parents are or where you are born. Determined to tear down the barriers to opportunity which hold back too many of our children. That is Labour's purpose, and the result today speaks to the trust the British people have put in our changed Labour Party. And after 14 years as your Labour MP in opposition, I am so proud to be part of a party which has tonight not just won the trust of people here in Houghton and Sunderland South, but of the people across Britain. Labour will honour the trust that you have placed in us. I will honour the trust that you have placed in me. And I will work every day to deliver the promises that Labour has made and the better future that we, each of us and all of us, deserve. From the bottom of my heart, thank you.
this landslide is on shifting sands and it could evaporate, because what you're seeing in many ways is get the Tories out, but no real love for Labour. And that is the great danger for Keir Starmer.
I think the greater concern for the whole of the UK, and I mean, we had this conversation not long ago, that the centre ground of British politics has shifted to the right over the last 10, 15 years in particular. And the question is going to be that if Reform are doing as well as is expected, is whether the parties that are in power, presumably Labour, will try and placate that side and that more right-wing rhetoric, or whether they'll try and take it head-on. So I think we could be in for quite a scary next Parliament, if I'm being honest.
How worried are you, Vince Campbell?
Well, very worried to see the populist right doing so well. But I think what this indicates, is that we're going to see a civil war on the right. 120 Tories, if that's what we finish up with, maybe 30, 40 of them will feel comfortable with reform. You're going to get people fighting at the grassroots. Every time there's a by-election, a council election, they'll be tearing strips of each other. You know, that's going to be one of the big political stories of the next few years. I'm not sure that the Tory party, as we recognise it, is going to survive this.
I mean, the thing is, Anne Widdecombe, I mean, isn't there a possibility that if there's been a straightforward transfer of Conservative supporters in these seats to Reform, it might just be a protest. It might just be the fag end of the Conservative Party, people saying, well, I'm not voting for them again, I'm not voting for Labour, so I'll vote Reform. Well, it might not be structural, is what I'm saying.
The first thing I would say about those two results is that if we can get that percentage in safe Labour seats, then in the marginals, you know, I really want to see what we might do. That's the first thing to say before going on to your question. No, I don't think Reform is just a protest vote. Now, there is an element of that, and only a fool would deny it. But from the canvassing that I've been doing up and down the country, people have positively said, you know, they like what we say. They particularly like the social stuff. They like the anti-woke stuff.
I was canvassing in the Midlands at the weekend, and there's no doubt immigration kept coming up as an issue. You have to understand that. You have to address it. What you can't do, though, in my view, is pander to it. I think what the Conservatives have done, and they've paid a price for it, is actually they've sort of pretended to be like Reform. But they haven't, and this is Nadine's criticism of Rishi Sunak, he hasn't gone the whole way. I think the Labour Party have to show that they can address these problems through policy and through actually having genuine, honest debates with the public about the nature of the challenge. And that does mean challenging some of the prejudices,
but Alastair,
challenging some of the populism.
If Labour are going to take away the deterrent of removal, then how are you going to deal with it? This is the whole point, which is why Reform will continue to batter you.
No, but Nadeem...
That is what will happen.
One of the reasons... Listen, I don't think there's anybody in the country, including Rishi Sunak, who really thinks that this Rwanda plan was ever a runner. And I think that that's now gone.
But listen, the challenge for us as a party, the reason this whole campaign was so divided, which really hurt Rishi Sunak, is because the immigration is such a challenging issue that it's hard to deal with. This is really, really hard. There are no simple answers. What Reform can sell is that, you know, black and white binary. When you get into office, you know it's not that easy.
But they'll do that on any issue.
It's never easy to handle these things.
Well, you ought to know that as well, Anne Widdecombe. You've been in office.
I have been in office, and I've been the immigration minister for that matter. And the one thing I do know, both from my time in office and from my time as Shadow Home Secretary, is that the only thing that actually works is a strong deterrent. Rwanda isn't, because it's not happening.
Could I disagree with everyone?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, of course, in Scotland, the immigration factor is the complete opposite, in that Scotland, we need immigration. But there's also, I think, a more nuanced approach to this, where any conversation about immigration very quickly turns to public services. And again, this is something that we've touched on before. I think a lot of people who feel that immigration is the biggest issue, it's actually because they don't have any high-profile politicians standing up and saying, no, the problem isn't the asylum seeker coming to the country. The problem is your government's not building enough houses, your government's not investing enough in the NHS.
Have you heard from Boris Johnson so far tonight? And?
Running commentary.
What, you want the time?
I want to know what he said.
Well, can you tell us?
Sweet to hear.
Yeah.
No.
You're not going to tell us what he said? No. OK, that's no use. Is he talking about coming back?
Is he watching you on Channel 4? Is he watching Channel 4?
Why don't you talk to Alastair about Tony Blair?
Well,
because he's obviously not got over him yet.
So why don't we know that you're about to leave us. What do you expect? Do you think that Boris Johnson will come back into the Conservative Party in any shape or form in the next incarnation?
Well, so, you know, I'll just make the same point again. Reform on 3%.
Wait, don't make the same point again. Just tell us about Boris Johnson.
It actually is, it's important in terms of the context of what happens in the future to the Conservative Party. I happen to think that the rise of the reform and the rise of the right in the UK is a really dangerous prospect.
He hasn't said anything, has he?
And
he hasn't said anything, has he?
What, about him coming back?
Yes.
Not about coming back, no, because we're talking about the results and the percentages.
OK.
And the fact
is he saying, God, get me away from this party, or is he saying, they need me, here's my case?
That's not the discussion.
Do you think he is the person who could actually bring it back together and bring people back from reform to the Conservative Party?
So if I think reform and the rise of the right and some of the behaviours that we've seen from reform over this campaign, what's happening in France and other countries across Europe, I think it's, and in Canada, I think it's alarming, the rise and the right. And I know the point's been made that we are... Well, Emily, if everybody else is allowed to make their speeches, and so could I just finish what I'm going to say? Well, I'm not making a speech, but could I just finish what I was going to say?
Briefly.
So I think that the fact that there is a rise on the right, we may not be far behind it. And I think that it's indicated if reform comes second in a large number of seats,
Nadine, I just
then
want to
we
bring
will
a stat
need
to you.
someone
Boris Johnson.
who can take on Nigel.
One of the reasons why your party is in such trouble...
into that.
One of the reasons why your party has lost so badly tonight is because you keep defending a liar and because other people keep defending Liz Truss, who crashed the economy. This is a story of 14 years and 5 prime ministers who run this country into the ground. If you seriously think that bringing those people back is the way to sort your party out,
Are you the author
on.
of the sex dossier and the war in Iraq merchant? Are you actually throwing these accusations across the table?
Because you're a proven liar by a parliamentary account. Boris Johnson, your mate.
Well, weren't you proved to be a liar by your sexed up dossier in the war in Iraq? Weren't you proven to be a liar, Alastair?
Rory, why don't you make a grown-up point from the right?
I think we should get the party started. I mean, everyone's looking very glum round these parts. Go on.
What's in your coffee cup?
Landslide. 14 years of corruption and lies and gaslighting. You've got 2 disgraced chancellors, Tory chancellors in this studio. You've got Nadine Dorries, a woman who barely turned up as her last year as an MP. And everybody out there is thinking, no more of this, no more of the lies, of the deceit, of the corruption, of the VIP PPE lane scandal, the betting scandal. I mean, who could ever have thought that a government would be as utterly banal and ridiculous as this one? So let's get the party started because they have gone.
I'll drink to that.
Yay!
There we go.
Hey, cheers.
But what do you really think, Carol?
I've spent 18 months now, like hours and hours and hours a day, just out of a passion for...
Because it's been
absolute warrior on Twitter as well.
Well, I mean,
dismantling
it's
the Tories.
Because
but what motivated you in the first place? Because it was very surprising suddenly seeing you bursting onto the...
Well, I'll tell you what motivated me was the lies, was Partygate and the VIP PPE lane. And in a way, the media not pushing it forward as they should was a disgrace. I could not believe, and there were people today who were taking photographs outside their polling stations saying, "This is for you, Dad. I couldn't see my father when they were partying. I couldn't see my father. Oh, this is for you, Nan, because we had to say goodbye on FaceTime." And people have not forgotten, and it doesn't matter how many times politicians say, "Oh, well, it was just a bit of cake," or, oh, it was this or that, and endlessly sit in studios saying this stuff because people are living it out there. And that's why they are going down and out tonight, and I am so here for it.
He's talking about this candidate, Robert Lomas, who was removed but obviously his name was still on the ballot. And he said, and I'm going to read this out because I think it's horrendous, but it is probably important that we know who we're dealing with. The phrase he used was that black people should get off their arses and stop acting like savages. Now, your party removed him as far as they could from the ballot. If he wins tonight in Barnsley, what do you say?
Well, I think Nigel Farage will say what he's already said, which is you're not in our party.
So he's not a Reform MP?
He won't be.
He'll sit as an independent?
You'll have to. I mean, there's no other option, is there? What's the other option? There isn't one.
I want to take you back to the early 1990s, to an election which may have some similarities with tonight's events. It was 1993 in Canada. The Conservatives had been in power for about a decade. The country had endured a cost of living crisis and the Prime Minister had resigned. A new Prime Minister, Kim Campbell, won the job after an internal leadership contest. Don't know if any of that sounds familiar to you. But anyway, in Canada, the Conservatives went on to lose almost all of their seats in a near-total wipeout. And despite not actually winning power, the architect of the Conservatives' demise was, any guesses? It was the Reform Party. Now, let's go back to the UK. John Major, having won a Tory party leadership race himself to replace Margaret Thatcher, then won the 1992 election. But spin forward 5 years to 97, and things could only get, well, worse for the Tories. Because as we all know, Tony Blair came to power with 418 seats, a majority of 179, and the Labour landslide that wiped out the Tories after 18 years in power. You remember this. Now, back when Keir Starmer took over the leadership in April 2020, it looked like he had a mountain to climb. The summit of his ambition was getting into number 10, but the peak of his powers could be way beyond anything anyone could have imagined just 4 years ago, because it's currently looking very good for him indeed.
Thank you, Hannah.
You have to admit, we've all just had sweets. So that's why nobody at this desk
I'm
can
struggling
speak.
to speak.
You know, not toffee, but licorice, so just give us a point.
I said no sweets, Emily brought sweets.
I think go to nut him. He's not been eating.
Who hasn't had a sweet? Who can speak? Are you feeling like Britain's first female Chancellor? Is your box full for tomorrow?
Well, I'm under no illusions about the scale of the challenge that I will inherit if I become Chancellor of the Exchequer tomorrow, and the severity of the inheritance that the Conservatives will leave us. But I'm ready for that challenge. I am ready to start the work of rebuilding our economy, bringing stability back to our economy, bringing investment back to our economy so that we have more good jobs, paying decent wages, so we can tackle the cost of living crisis. I'm ready to get to work, and after 14 years of opposition, 14 years of chaos and division and decline under the Conservatives, people in Britain today have voted for change, and Labour will not let them down.
I'm very sceptical about this exit poll now. I'm beginning to think the actual results will be quite different from what we heard at 10 o'clock. Because two things. One of them is the more parties you have, the more difficult to get. So as reform goes up and you have 4 parties in play, everything begins to get stranger. But the turnout, if you look at Blyth, which was the second constituency to announce, it was often getting turnouts well into the 60%.
Just looking at the pictures as you speak,
and
Rory,
it's now
this is
50.
Douglas Ross at Murray, Aberdeenshire North and Murray. He's their Conservative leader in Scotland. You can carry on talking. I just want to point out the picture.
But it's that if the Blyth second result, turnout just over 50%. Now, turnout's not always great up there, but there's often been turnout 60, 63% up there. So if the turnout comes significantly down, all the polls go wrong.
Well, of course, the last time Labour had to improve the health service, and it did improve the health service, it put in a huge amount of money. It increased the health budget by, 7%? And you haven't got anything like that. And the health service is arguably more broken now than it was then. So you're going to have a real tough job delivering public service change.
Well, I think the important thing is that we look at the state of the NHS and are firstly honest about it. It is going through what is objectively the worst crisis in its history, but also recognise that unless it reforms and unless it modernises, it's not going to survive the 21st century. It's not going to be there for us when we need it. It's not there for us when we need it now. When you look at people waiting far too long in A&E, or literally dying on waiting lists, or struggling to access GPs. The NHS is going through the worst crisis in its history, and we've got a serious plan that will help us over the course of the Parliament to get the NHS back on its feet and make sure that it's fit for the future.
You've got to turn it around in 5 years, haven't you? Otherwise, you wouldn't deserve to be re-elected.
Well, we've set some tough and ambitious but achievable targets to get NHS waiting time standards back to where they should be under the NHS Constitution. We think we can do that within one term. Over the course of a decade of national renewal, we want to make sure that we have the best healthcare service in the world, that we're reducing the number of lives lost to the biggest killers, that we're closing the gap in healthy life expectancy between those from the wealthiest and the poorest backgrounds, tackling the big racial disparities in the NHS. That change does take time. It takes more than one term. But of course, in order to get a second term, you've got to deliver in the first. And I hope very much that will be my job tomorrow.
Just seeing Rachel win, I think we've had 14 years of shocks and frights. The country feels like it's been doing this for a long time. And there's something very steady and sensible. I heard she was on Alastair and Rory's podcast. I heard the, when you spoke to her, and she's a wonk for finance, and there's something very steady and deep-rooted about her. And there was a woman made a comment, she was a town planner, writing into The Guardian, just saying, Starmer's political vegetable broth. The Tories have been sugar-laden cakes and jellies and foie gras and caviar, and we've all got a bit of a sore tummy. We need some bread and butter and some plain soup. And I think there's something about this yearning for steadiness. Financially we need it. There was a chief exec from a big pharma company just saying the other day, they haven't felt like they wanted to invest in this country because the planning laws are crazy. There's no financial steadiness. We're in the G7 where our growth is slow. We just need to be steady. We need to have no fireworks. We don't need any big extreme things. We just need a steadiness. And so I think with the partnership of Rachel and Keir, there'll be something steady.
But culturally, I mean, Dawn just sort of said, people have rejected the culture wars. Do you think the culture wars are behind us?
Honestly, in the great scheme of things, I think we need to steady ourselves financially. We need to stop mould growing in people's homes. We've got 30% of 4.3 million children are going to school hungry. We've got really big fish to fry, and I think that the sort of dog whistle angle of lots of stuff that we get fed, it's like, look over here, don't look over here. Don't talk about, what was the effect of Brexit on the country? What is going on with the environment? These are massive things. So Labour needs a good decade's worth of planning so that they can plan long term and steady the ship.
And it's also interesting, actually, Jacob Rees-Mogg, because he was one of the few politicians, actually, when it was very unpopular to say this, who came out and said the stripping of Shamima Begum's citizenship by a Home Secretary was wrong because she has now created different classes, Sajid Javid, he has now created different classes of citizens in our country. And so I think, I don't think you can judge people just by the way that they look or the way that they speak.
But if he
actually,
loses the seat tonight, I mean, if you think about the chaos he has helped underpin in the Conservative Party, will you be sorry to see him go?
I think am I sorry to see the Conservative Party go tonight? No, I'm not. I think it was time for them to go. And I think, if the exit polls are right, then congratulations to the Labour Party and to Keir Starmer for leading them to this victory. I think we'd got to a point where the Conservative Party was no longer a Conservative Party. Whatever you thought about Conservative policies, the two things that you could always be sure about was that it was the party of law and order and it was the party of sound money. And I don't think on either of those you can say that what's happened over the last 5 or 6 years supports that. And so I think we need to go away and we need to think about who we are, what we want to be, exactly what Heidi said, how we treated the great offices of state. And it wasn't just the Prime Minister's office, it wasn't just Downing Street, it was the Home Office, it was every aspect of the way in which government was now being treated. And it was the scandal after scandal after scandal. And I know so many Conservative colleagues who still sit on the Conservative benches were deeply uncomfortable with what was going on, and some people like Heidi left because they just couldn't deal with it anymore, and many of us stayed to try and change the party from within. And after, you know, Labour's victory and whatever happens tomorrow and we get a new government, I think those of us in the Conservative Party who want to see a sensible centre-right party have to think long and hard about how we make sure that this moment isn't used by the party to lurch further to the right, but instead it sees itself first and foremost as a party, a sensible party of opposition who have to hold a Labour government with a large majority to account.
But you know what's going to happen in the morning is Nigel Farage is going to come out and say he's going to be the leader of the opposition and he's going to invite Conservatives to join him and to be led by him, and he's going to begin his assaults on your party.
And that will depend on how many seats in the end Reform win and how many seats in the end the Conservative Party win. And I'm not confident that the predicted seats of the exit poll are what we will see in the morning.
We all said to every Reform interviewee in front of us during this campaign that you were going to hand power to Labour. That is what you've done, isn't it?
Well, no, I mean, you might as well argue that, you know, voting Conservative was a vote for Labour because we were neck and neck in the polls. So I don't accept that. But even if I did, I would say very straightforwardly that, sad as I am, I don't regret it because it was the biggest shambles of a government that I have seen in my lifetime, and that includes Jim Callaghan.
Do you think Labour will be better than the Conservatives?
No, I don't think that, but I think the Conservatives... No, I really don't think that, but I do think that the Conservatives needed to lose big time in order to get their act together.
Bobby Elmo-Smith, 19. David Robert Stansell, Green Party, 4,030. Keir Starmer, Labour Party, 18,884.
Thank you so much. It is a huge privilege to be re-elected to serve this constituency, the incredible community of Holborn and St Pancras. My home, where my kids have grown up, where my wife was born. And I have to thank Vic and my family more than anyone for their love and support and for keeping me totally grounded. Thank you, Vic. And thank you so much to the police and the returning officer for making sure every voice is heard and every vote is counted. And thank you to Andy White, a fantastic agent, the campaign team, the local party, and all the volunteers who've worked so hard over the last 6 weeks and beyond. Every door knocked, every leaflet delivered, every conversation had, it makes a massive difference. And lastly, I'd like to pay tribute to my fellow candidates who put themselves forward for public service. Because in this room, right here, beats the heart of our democracy. Not in Westminster or Whitehall, but in town halls and community centres up and down the country, in polling stations and voting booths, and most of all, in the hands of the people who hold the power of the vote. It all starts here. And it starts with you. Change begins in this community, with the people who came together to make life better, like the fantastic councillors who work so hard for our area. Service starts in this neighbourhood. The groups, the faith communities, the local organisations who serve week in, week out. And hope starts with that one kid from Somerstown who dares to believe that the future belongs to her. And with Labour, it will. Because I promise this, whether you voted for me or not, I will serve every person in this constituency. The mothers I sat with who've lost children to knife crime. Mothers who can't get the doctor's appointments they desperately need. The local businesses who've struggled so hard to keep their head above water. I will speak out for you, have your back, fight your corner every single day. Because tonight people here and around the country have spoken, and they're ready for change, to end the politics of performance and return to politics as public service. The change begins right here, because this is your democracy, your community and your future. You have voted. It is now time for us to deliver. Thank you very much.
I think what Reform UK has achieved in those just few short weeks is truly extraordinary. Given that we had no money, no branch structure, virtually nothing across the country, we are going to come second in hundreds of constituencies. How many seats we're going to win, I don't know. But to have done this in such a short space of time says something very fundamental is happening. It's not just disappointment with the Conservative Party. There is a massive gap on the centre-right of British politics, and my job is to fill it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. But it's not just what we do in Parliament as a national party that matters, it's what we do out round the country. Getting 5,000 people in that room in Birmingham last week, the energy, the optimism, the enthusiasm, the belief that Westminster is just completely out of touch with ordinary people says to me that my plan is to build a mass national movement over the course of the next few years and hopefully be big enough to challenge the general election properly in 2029. What is interesting is there's no enthusiasm for Labour, there's no enthusiasm for Starmer whatsoever. In fact, about half of the vote is simply an anti-Conservative vote. This Labour government will be in trouble very, very quickly. We will now be targeting Labour votes. We're coming for Labour, be in no doubt about that. I want to thank the team that have helped me do this over the last few weeks, my fellow candidates for behaving as impeccably as they have. Believe me, folks, this is just the first step of something that is going to stun all of you. Thank you very much.
That is a very, very odd statement to make at the end of your account. So, as you see, most people are sort of thanking their police officers. This is a sort of attempt to pitch the Conservative Party to the right. And when she's apologising, we've let you down, she's basically saying we let you down because, not I, Suella, but, you know, people like me and Nikki let you down, and if only we'd been the Reform Party, everything.
Jeremy, it's Alastair. Would you hope that one day, like me, having been expelled from the Labour Party, that you'd get back into it?
Listen, Alastair, we've just had an election. I've been elected as an independent MP. I am very much part of the wider Labour movement. I've been a trade unionist all my life, and I'll be a trade unionist to the day I die. And I will obviously be campaigning and working with people both inside and outside the Labour Party. But I've been elected as an independent, and that's the mandate I've been given.
Jeremy, it's Rory coming in here. Are you worried that Labour's going to come in with a kind of mini austerity? They're signing up to £18 billion worth of spending cuts. They're ruling out any additional borrowing. They're ruling out tax rises. How are they going to be able to invest in public services and get the country going again if they're running on an austerity package?
I think you've taken us straight to the kernel of the problem. If the Labour manifesto doesn't offer any substantial changes either in taxation or in redistribution of wealth within our society, then how on earth can you bring about the social changes that are needed? Or are you going to go down the road of further wage freezes on top of the 20% cut in the living standards of the poorest people over the past 15 years? People vote for change and they expect to get it. So I would imagine there's going to have to be some serious heart searching about the economic direction in which this government is going to go, because if it doesn't deliver fundamental change, there's going to be a lot of very angry people out there.
Good morning. Could I start by thanking the returning officer and all the team who've been working here at the count and at the polling stations today. You make our democracy possible. I'd also like to thank the police who have ensured that we can conduct this ballot here in North Yorkshire but also across the country in safety. On this difficult night, I'd like to express my gratitude to the people of the Richmond and Northallerton constituency for your continued support. Since I moved here a decade ago, you have made me and my family feel so at home, and I look forward to continuing to serve as your Member of Parliament. It is an enormous privilege. I'm grateful to my agent and constituency team, and I congratulate my opponents here on the energetic and very good-natured campaigns that they have run. The Labour Party has won this general election, and I have called Sir Keir Starmer to congratulate him on his victory. Today, power will change hands in a peaceful and orderly manner, with goodwill on all sides. That is something that should give us all confidence in our country's stability and future. The British people have delivered a sobering verdict tonight. There is much to learn and reflect on, and I take responsibility for the loss. To the many good, hard-working Conservative candidates who lost tonight, despite their tireless efforts, their local records of delivery, and their dedication to their communities, I am sorry. I will now head down to London, where I will say more about tonight's result before I leave the job of Prime Minister, to which I have given my all. I will then return here, to my family's home, and I look forward to spending more time with you all in the weeks, months, and years ahead. Thank you.
We did it! You fought for it, you voted for it, and now it has arrived. Change begins now. I have to be honest. 4.5 years of work changing the party. This is what it is for. A changed Labour Party, ready to serve our country, ready to restore Britain to the service of working people. People will be waking up to the news, relieved that a weight has been lifted, a burden finally removed from the shoulders of this great nation. And now we can look forward again, walk into the morning, the sunlight of hope, pale at first, but getting stronger through the day, shining once again on a country with the opportunity, after 14 years, to get its future back. Each and every one of you here for campaigning so hard for change, and not just in this campaign either, also for these 4.5 years changing our party. The Labour movement is always everything's achieved, past and future, down to the efforts of its people. So thank you truly. You have changed our country.
The volatility we talk about quite glibly, but the truth is Boris Johnson got close to a record in 2019, which was just the last election, and Labour went to one of its record defeats in the last election. Now it's going to one of its record victories.
He got 67%.
And the Conservatives are going to one of its record defeats just in 5 years. So we're in a world where we've all got to somehow believe in democracy. Look at the States, look at France, and Britain, you know, Harriet will want to see this as a wonderful moment, and it is a wonderful moment for Labour. But I think if we look at the bigger structural issues in Europe and the US, there's a lot to be worried about in our democracy.
But maybe integrity has something to do with this as well. I mean,
I was going to say, I think it's a bit like, you know, blaming the electorate for their volatility. I think they were just fed up with their cost of living being squeezed,
but
public
why did
services
they vote
crumbling,
such enormous
Liz
numbers
Truss
for
and the
Boris
fiasco.
Johnson?
I think there's That's what's done it, not their volatility. There's now a record number of women MPs elected, and I think there's going to be even more during the night. So it's now up to 223. When I was first elected, and that was not recently, there was only 20. And now we've gone up to 223. And I think that denotes a massive social change. But one of the things that Keir Starmer said is he said country before party. And I hope that these women, who are in all parties except Reform, will say gender before party. And I hope that they will form a women's caucus and actually be determined to deliver for women, because we've had increasing numbers of women coming into Parliament, and now a record. But actually, they've got to be there to deliver for women on the things that matter, like childcare, tackling domestic violence, equal pay. I mean, if you can't, with that record number of women working together in Parliament, deliver that, then, you know, what are you there for?
Phillips, Jessica Rose, known as Jess Phillips, Labour Party, 11,275. Total number of rejected ballot papers is 120. Excuse me. Excuse me. Thank you. Number of rejected ballot papers is 128. This represents a majority of 693, with a turnout of 49.5%. I therefore do hereby declare that Phillips Jessica Rose, known as Jess Phillips, is duly elected as the Member of Parliament for Birmingham Yardley constituency.
Well, a very close thing for Jess Phillips. She's just scraped in.
Indeed. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
See, we're going to continue with the class that we had during the campaign.
Excuse me.
It's all right. The election that I have...
This will be a warning. I will be asking people to leave unless we get this completed.
I will carry on with my speech. I understand that a strong woman standing up to you is met with such reticence. Anyway, this election has been... Can you throw them out?
All right, excuse me. Before we have our first speeches, that's final warning.
This election has been the worst election I have ever stood in. Today, a brilliant community activist who puts on events for every single part of our community came out to campaign with me, and people filmed her on the streets and then slashed her tyres. A young woman on her own, delivering leaflets, was filmed and screamed at by a much older man in the street. Today, I was to be joined by the family of Jo Cox, who wanted to come out and campaign with me. And there is absolutely no way I could have allowed for them to see what was aggressive and violence in our democracy. And now to the positive. Birmingham Yardley gave my family everything that we have. And today, actually not today, yesterday, was the 13th anniversary of my mother dying. And my mother was born in Gleneagles Road in Yardley. And my dad lived in a council house round the corner. And everything good that they ever had, and everything good that my children had, that I had as a child, was provided for us by successive Labour governments. The greatest honour to my mother today is that we will have a chance, not just to be an opposition MP, but to be somebody who opens things, just doesn't have to campaign just about closing them. Our country is in desperate, desperate need, and our politics is in even greater need of cleaning up. And I thank everybody in this room for making a really good spectacle of proving that for me. I'd like to thank the people who work for me so incredibly hard, to John, to David, to Catherine, to Olivia, to Anna, Apollo and Jane, and to my amazing activists, Yvette, Zafar and Sakib, who have worked like absolute Trojans in this election. I'd also like to thank West Midlands Police for the constant phone calls they had to take from me today and for their responses to the aggression that we have suffered. I'd like to thank my husband and my children. I didn't bring my children here tonight because I knew that this would happen and they deserve better. And I know that a Labour government will provide them with better and they will build a better future for our city. And just finally, I love that my seat was a marginal seat. I think marginal seats make better members of Parliament. And that is exactly what I have always been and always will be. Well, British politics has got caustic and nasty and dishonest, and we have to be really careful not to fall for it. And these people shouting and screaming, I didn't meet those people behind the doors. People were upset, people were kind, people were thoughtful. And yes, many of them were disappointed, and the Labour Party has got to win back their trust. But these people, and what they did throughout the campaign, they do not represent any part of my constituency. That is not what I saw. I had lots of very heartfelt, deep, difficult conversations with people, and I get that, you know, there is a massive piece of work to do, and I will do it.
Liz Truss, Steve Baker, we have seen some of the big Tory beasts lose their seat tonight. As you saw a moment ago there with the footage, but also earlier on this morning, I'm not sure what time of day it is, we had Education Secretary Gillian Keegan, Leader of the House of Commons Penny Mordaunt, Defence Secretary Grant Shapps and Jacob Rees-Mogg. But they are just some of more than 230 losses so far. So here for you is a little rundown of some other well-known names who have failed to win their seats back. First off, Johnny Mercer. This is in Plymouth Moorview. We mentioned him earlier in the programme. I assume you've been watching non-stop for the last 11 hours, but just in case you missed it, if you have a little look at how that unfolded, the outgoing Johnny Mercer was a captain in the Royal Artillery, and the new PM, Labour's Fred Thomas, is an ex-Royal Marine. Now, at the last election, Mr Mercer, the Minister of State for Veterans Affairs, had a very comfortable majority of more than 12,000. But tonight, that is gone. His vote share down by 31.7%. And if we just take a look at the swing here, you can see how that translates to a huge 20.3% swing to Labour from the Tories. Another Conservative with experience of sitting around the cabinet table who's lost out is Therese Coffey in the Suffolk Coastal constituency. Most recently, she was the Environment Secretary, and she almost clung on to her seat tonight, losing by just over 1,000 votes. And in fact, if you assume that Reform took the votes from the Tories here, and let's face it, they did, Therese Coffey may have had a very different night if they hadn't been running. Now, elsewhere, there are some prominent backbenchers who have also lost out. Sir Michael Fabricant, the other famous Tory who's recognisable for his distinctive blonde hair. He's been an MP since 1992, representing the people of Lichfield since 1997. But tonight, he has had a gigantic majority of more than 23,000 overturned. And that translates to a huge swing of 22.4% to give Labour's Dave Robertson a very slim majority of 810. And in Stoke-on-Trent North, former teacher and now former MP Jonathan Gullis narrowly avoided coming third after a rampant charge by the Reform candidate who took 24.1% of the vote there. Jonathan Gullis has most recently served as Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party. Now, I could be here for many more hours with this list, but let's just do one more. Another high-ranking party member is Jake Berry. This is a former Tory party chairman. His vote share down by 28%, most of that, of course, going to Reform here, who took more than 21% of the votes. So, senior Tories, safe seat veterans, former cabinet ministers, former prime ministers, current cabinet ministers, no one tonight has been safe from the Tory wipeout.
You look across Europe and what we've seen in the European elections, what we've seen in France and Italy, is this increasing move to a populist nationalism on the right. I think the scale of Labour's victory could mask, if we're not careful, the fact that actually in the UK, in many of those constituencies, what we've seen is that if you added the Reform and the Conservative votes together, Labour would not have won those seats. And that means that we have to be incredibly humble in government. We have to understand that actually the right hasn't gone away. The left is not dominant.
You talk about Rishi Sunak, so I'll mention Rishi in particular. You have one of the richest, most privileged people in the country getting the top job. And what Justine's been talking about, that lack of access, that's actually got much worse just in my lifetime. So when I was a teenager and growing up in the back streets of Liverpool, it was actually achievable to... And it's across all sectors, the arts and many sectors too. It was achievable if you really worked hard. That equality was there. You could get to university.
But Nadine, you are funny. Let's be honest. You call David Cameron a posh boy, but Boris Johnson, who's been to exactly the same school and had the same upbringing, is absolutely fine. And
No, I have to address that. So
I mean, look, they're all, very privileged people, but somehow you choose the one you love and you hate the rest.
No.
But can I just pick up on something
Can I
Barry's...
just say that he spent... We have not similar backgrounds, but he had no money growing up. You may say he had privilege, but he knows what hardship is like. So there is a difference.
He went to Eton. What are you talking about?
Yeah, on the scholarship.
And all his brothers went to Eton. How did his brothers afford to go to Eton?
Everyone in that family got...
They didn't. No, they didn't.
Can I just say...
The Conservative Party deserved to lose. Over the last few years, it's been divided, riven, you've had factions. They just didn't know how to behave. And I think this election was over before it started, because people had decided that they're not going to vote for a rabble who look self-interested, divided, and there's no clarity of purpose in government, let alone the competence we've just been discussing. I mean, this is, or was, a parliament with very few characters of substance in it. We'd had no end of ministers and resignations, 5 different factions with their own labels of organisation on any vote. Get out!
Would there have
that
been any
was
point
the fundamental
in
point.
Rishi Sunak delaying the election? Because he's getting a lot of stick, today, naturally, for calling it at the worst possible time. This is the worst possible result. If it had been November, would it have been any different?
No, I think this is complete nonsense, because it wouldn't have made any difference. I think the outcome would have been the same. Think of this. Look, when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, there was the 5-year cycle, which has come back recently. She always did about 4. This is 4.5. Now, if he'd waited, you'd had all the summer, which would have been a complete mess. All the journalists would have said, oh, he's hanging on to Downing Street by his fingertips. Why is he waiting to the very last minute? You'd have a party conference season, which would have been complete mayhem. Then you'd have campaigning in November and December.
I mean, it's all
it would have been worse.
Let's go back to the
battle for the leadership of the party has essentially already begun. Been thrown into some disarray by the fact that so many of the potential contenders have lost their seats. People like Penny Mordaunt, for example, a domain name, an internet name had already been registered for her fight for the leadership. She's out. So the remaining contenders, those that are there, broadly from the right of the party, Kemi Badenoch, the business secretary, former Home Secretaries Priti Patel and Suella Braverman. So there'll be a tussle for the soul of the party, driven very much by all those seats that have been, all those votes that have been lost to Reform and how they handle Nigel Farage in future. Tom Tugendhat, Security Minister, he could be one of the contenders from the centre of the party, trying to hold that centre ground as they fight it out. And that fight could take place all through the summer. They may have a new leader in place at September. We just don't know the timetable yet. But of course, while the Tories are tearing themselves apart, debating over the future of their party, the New Look cabinet will begin to be formed from today, and it will be a radically changed cabinet. One of the people who would have been sitting around the cabinet table had he not lost his seat, Jonathan Ashworth, talked about this being the most working class, the most state school educated cabinet in history, and it certainly appears that way. We're told that there will be a kind of quad of senior ministers sitting above the cabinet, really driving the kind of central missions, as Sir Keir Starmer has put it. Sir Keir obviously heading that quad. Rachel Reeves, the first female Chancellor, will be an incredibly influential member of the government, and Angela Rayner, who's expected to be confirmed as Deputy Prime Minister, will also join that quartet of senior ministers. And Pat McFadden, who was a shadow Cabinet Office Minister, remains to be seen what job he'll get in this new cabinet. But it will be a radically changed government. We've had this historic night, a momentous night, and we will see that change from 14 years of Conservative rule in the coming minutes, hours and weeks. It will unfold.
With this tiny talent pool of 120, to rush into a leadership contest as if the choice of that leader somehow settles the philosophical differences we've been batting about today and the party's been batting about for years is crackers.
But let's just move on a second. Happen. You know it isn't, because they are all desperate to be leaders. They won't wait a year.
I keep hearing Gary in my ear sort of echoing the lesson of the night is that the public are sick of this. And whatever that conversation happens...
Sick of what?
The Tories.
The Tory psychodrama. And so, yes, that conversation will happen, but, I mean...
But that's just Gary's opinion. That doesn't reflect the low turnout. We don't know what the people who didn't turn out and vote think. They may not be sick of it. They just may want the Conservative
Nadine,
Party
get real.
to become Conservatives again. Because I think that's one of the big problems. We failed to be a Conservative party.
I think it's one
the Conservative Party is 3 foot underground. Why do you want to bury it 6 foot
This is what people want to stop.
Where do you think reform have come from?
Lots of reasons for that.
I had a few texts. Boris Johnson, I'm very happy to read one out.
Yeah.
So I asked, what were reform on when you were Prime Minister? He said they were on about 3%.
We could have Googled that, Nadine.
This is caused by Rishi's disastrous dropping of Brexit and levelling up. Starmer has a much smaller share of the vote than we did in 2019.
Clutching at
OK, that's Boris Johnson.
Breaking news. That's Boris Johnson's first comment on the campaign.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you very much. Over the last 11 hours, one of the most extraordinary election results in British political history has occurred.
We have seen the end of 14 years of Conservative rule, and Labour is sweeping to power with a huge majority just 5 years after they suffered one of their worst ever election defeats, 2019. Rishi Sunak said the night had been hard beyond belief in an emotional speech to those party workers.
In a couple of hours, Sir Keir Starmer will go to the Palace and be invited to form a new government. He'll then go to Downing Street as the new Prime Minister. And we will cover that on a Channel 4 News special at 11 o'clock.
The Conservatives have lost their former Prime Minister Liz Truss, and Jacob Rees-Mogg was defeated by Dan Norris of Labour. 9 other cabinet ministers, including Penny Mordaunt and Grant Shapps, have now gone.
The Lib Dems have won more than 70 seats. The Greens have won 4. Reform have elected 4 MPs, including Nigel Farage, but they've also come second in 98 seats.
And the SNP has had a disastrous night in Scotland. The Tories have been wiped out of Wales. Turnout has been depressingly low, close to the lowest for 140 years.
So, it's been an extraordinary night. Britain has voted. Britain has changed. Britain has decided. From all of us, a very good morning.